and you take the work and empower your coalition members to do that and to build capacity around what they're working on and to bring in other partners to move things forward, you naturally are creating sustainability.
Every single one of us is a leader and could be a leader.
It started with a local coalition in our county.
Strategies you know, but stories you don't.
Data is the currency of prevention.
We want to reduce the negative, and we want to promote the positive.
Collaboration is the only way to move the prevention needle.
About connecting the research with the practitioner.
Put something out there that was kind of off the wall and create a community of prevention.
It's a passion, it's a real love to try to help make our world a little bit better, a little bit happier, small pieces at a time.
It's said an overnight success takes 16 years.
If we didn't plan for the change, but if we didn't help orchestrate it, then change is going to be upon us.
When it comes to the spiff, slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. Because the real power is in the process.
Ultimately, all of us want success in the work we're doing. We don't want to do mindless work. Proactive, participatory planning promotes positive, preventive progress.
This is the Mid-America PTTC podcast. I'm your host, Dave Clausen, and I'm the director of the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center. And today we'll be talking with Angie and Carrie again. They are both facilitators with Hugh Life, and the Hugh Life mission is to educate, facilitate, and inspire engagement and meaningful action for the greater good of communities and organizations. In today's episode, we will be talking about leading a DFC coalition, writing for years 1 through 5, and for 6 through 10, along with a proven process that builds buy-in and sustainability right from the beginning. Before we get into the content, we'd like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And a quick note, although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the podcast. I'd like to get things started off with a little bit about your backgrounds. And I think it's really important that you both have a rich history of working with prevention coalitions throughout our region, especially in Iowa. So could you take a moment and just sort of share a little bit of your background with our listeners?
Hi, my name is Carrie Terhark. I am a facilitator and trainer with Hugh Life. My background, I was a coalition director in North Central Iowa. We had a 5-year DFC and just secured year 6. I also served as a state executive board member for our state coalition, AC4C.
And I am Angie Asa-Lupstead, and I am a trainer, facilitator, and coach for Hugh Life. Prior to coming into Hugh Life full-time, I worked with coalitions across the state of Iowa as the director for the Iowa Alliance Coalitions for Change. And prior to doing that, I actually ran a miniature golf course, a part of my Kossuth Connections Coalition, and that's all that remains. So I've learned a lot of lessons about sustaining coalition work, so you're not just owning a miniature golf course.
So for today's episode, I'd love to get some insights and sort of lessons learned from your own experience with a DFC community coalition. Could you share just a little bit about sort of your background in relation to that, please?
I'm probably the veteran on this one. Not saying that I did everything right because I'm a veteran. That certainly does not imply that. I originally wrote it for, I think, a canoe trip was my first DFC. And so guess what? We didn't get funded. And so then we went on and we got a little smarter and we wrote it again and still didn't get it. And then my region, we had Mother Mary, I call her, and she said, you know what? I'm going to write this mentoring grant because they had received a DFC. It was way back in the 1990s, 99, I think she got her first DFC. So she wrote a mentoring grant to mentor 3 counties in how to develop a DFC. So I was one of those 3 counties that was mentored by Mother Mary. And then after that, I told Kelly, that program officer in DC, I said, there's no way I can put myself through writing this again, because this is going to be my third time writing. And I said, nope, not going to do it. She goes, yep, you are. So we did. And all three of us, I can remember sitting in Mother Mary's office in Mason City, Iowa, and thinking one of us are going to go home or two of us are going to go home, because this is when it was being released all on this day. And, we're going to either have a party or someone's going home crying. Well, all three of us received our DFC that day. And that kind of was the kickoff to what created, we ended up having 10 years of funding then with our, after that first initial, we reapplied and got another 10 years from our local coalition. And through that regional partnership, that led us into believing that we needed to work together. And after a few years, we were nearing our end of our 10-year cycle at our local county coalition. I was part of a statewide organization by then. We had organized on a state level, not just at a regional level. We said, there's enough of us. At one time, Iowa had 39 drug-free community sport grants. And there was enough of us timing out, because you only can get it for up to 10 years, that we said, maybe now's the time that we write a statewide DFC. So I was actually part of the team that wrote our statewide DFC, and we received it for the first 5 years. And just recently we received the 6 through 10 funding.
So I have definitely a much shorter experience with DFC. I came into DFC mentoring grant, and the DFC had been written already for our coalition by our mentor. And so kind of walked into a grant that was written for us. We did 5 years of DFC. I served on the AC4C state board, executive board, and so was very familiar with that grant and the details that went into that. Knowing that we would be writing for our second DFC, I wrote some stop-at grants for practice to see the process and to get familiar with my writing skills and to know where I had strengths and where I needed help, and then wrote for our 6 to 10 DFC, which was accepted this year. So.
Two great perspectives. Sounds like there's going to be some great, I'll call it lessons learned from either not getting it, but then also on the flip side from being funded. For somebody looking to write for their first DFC, what would you suggest they do?
I'm going to back it up before you actually are writing it. You should try and get on the review. Or read as many successful DFCs as possible, so you can understand. They've limited it now to 10 pages, so you have to be so concise with what you put into this package to really be able to tell your story in a very complete picture, but yet not wordy at all. So I think that's one of the important things, is to identify what successful ones look like. Because you may think you need to put all this filler in there. There's no room for filler. And
I'm going to have to agree with that. I think because I worked in the coalition and in DFC for 4 years before I wrote for one, I think that's what set me up to be successful in writing that grant, was that I was in and doing the work. I had read, the state's DFC. I had read other coalitions' DFCs. I knew ours in and out. So really being familiar with what is in there, and like I said, knowing how you answer questions personally, knowing kind of your personality trait, and that is super important, because just like Angie said, there's no room for fluff. So when you have a question, you answer that question only, and that was super difficult for me because when the question is asked, what is the problem in your community? I wanted to talk about it, but then I wanted to also say about how we were addressing it, or what was, what was the story behind it. And you want to get into so much detail because you want to get funded. So you feel like everybody has to know the whole story around it from all aspects. There's not enough room for that. And when you do that, you're missing the details of what the question is asking. And so I would write a section and then have somebody else review it, and they would say, this doesn't really answer the question. You're getting too far into the weeds about how you're going to do it. I think that's a challenge for me. I'm looking at it for writing a year one DFC is that you're trying to, you want to explain 5 years of grant funding, but then you're submitting a 1-year action plan. And that 1-year action plan is really going to be really about building capacity and getting information out and building skills. So answer the questions just how they're asked, and don't add any more than what's in there. You don't get extra points for elaborating further, as detailed as you can, and pay attention to where what sections are worth the most points. You want to make sure you have enough room in those sections that are worth 25 points to really get your point across.
So step 1, do your homework and read several that have been funded.
Yes.
Okay. And then step 2, clear and concise. Just the facts.
Yeah. And I think the way you get to that is to really prepare yourself. We talk a lot about the participatory way of building plans. And I think about we had a JAG funding. So through Office of Drug Control Policy, they funded us to go out and help coalitions prepare themselves to be able to get funded. Ultimately, it would be a drug-free community support grant. So I think if you can bring your community along in creating a plan that, again, Grant 101 is saying, don't go out and find funding and then write a grant or make your stuff up to fit that grant. You make your plan, find a grant that fits your plan. And if you set yourself up to do the SPIF, for example, because that's what the DFC is based on, is the Strategic Prevention Framework. If you do that process and bring your coalition members through the year of planning, when you come around to write that grant, all your pieces are there. It will be easier to be concise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think letting your data tell your story, really looking at that, and not just your, qualitative, but your quantitative data. What is the story of your community, and where are things going, and telling the story of your coalition, their involvement, why it's important to them, right? So, like Angie said, having that year of really engaging your coalition in the work that you want to do, and having them informed about what your data says, and having them along the process will make writing the DFC easier. And if it's not DFC, if it's something else, you're looking and you're saying, look, this is really more of a mental health issue, and there's something else that you need to be looking at.
We might need to change my step number. Maybe the new step 1 is to bring a group of folks together, your coalition, and start working together towards what you want your plan to be. Then step 2 would be read a bunch of DFCs. And then step 3 would be start writing clear and concise.
There you go.
So how do you take a group of people and bring them together and collaborate to come up with that plan for your coalition that will then potentially set the foundation for your DFC down the road?
Hopefully, your first step in coalition before you get to that point is building that trust and respect, people knowing why they're at the table. When you're getting prepared to write for your DFC, we did a lot of things around having conversations around pieces of data, and really digging down, what is this data telling us? What's the root cause behind this data? What are ways that we could what's a strategy or some strategies that we could implement that would directly affect this piece of data? And we did that collaboratively with a lot of data, and it took a long time. But as you're doing that and you're recording that, you're creating both your narrative and your action plan.
So the data, and I like how you really said the root causes. Often I see folks will just say, okay, our underage drinking rate is at this rate. Let's do something. We need to do something for that. Well, what are the root causes? You don't really know. Gotta dive.
You have to look at data outside of that. You have to look at, we looked at data that was coming from our substance abuse treatment agencies, right? So, what does their data say? What's their intake data that they're getting? We were doing focus groups with youth, and we were finding, other data around we started seeing that there was a rise not only in kids that were living at home with someone with a substance use disorder. We also found that those kids were feeling more and more disconnected from a positive youth in the community. And then we saw some spikes in our drinking. And so, were they related? I mean, you can make an assumption that there is something. So we looked at that and said, what is something that we can address? What are the root causes? What are the similar root causes between those? And what strategies can we put into place that are going to address all three of them?
So as you were sorting through the large amounts of data, so not just relying on one survey or one chunk of data, as you were starting to identify those root causes, what did y'all do next?
We really kind of came together and said, what, it's a coalition. So some of these things are beyond our reach, right? And then we're who in our community can help us, can partner with us to reach some of these things. And it was amazing when we started having those conversations that, there were some faith members, some pastors in our group. I always felt like, I'm not sure why I'm here and I'm not sure where this connects. But when we started having that conversation around kids being disconnected from positive adults and from them, living at home in different situations, they were like, well, that's what we do. That's exactly where we fit into the picture. And so then it was having strategies around, okay, what as a coalition can we do to support the faith community? What skills do they need to develop if they're working with these kids? What do they need to know? How can they help? And then where does that partnership align?
What I'm hearing, you looked at the data, you did that assessment, and then as you were starting to identify the root causes, you did another little assessment on the importance and the changeability of those root causes, and then you did a capacity assessment.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to work with.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of fitting.
It's kind of a theme, kind of something that we do.
Yes.
It goes around in a circle, like maybe like a flower.
Yeah, like the spit flower. Exactly. Okay, so as your coalition members are kind of saying, this is what we do, and you're looking for the skills that the faith-based community needs, what would kind of your next step?
Yeah, so then the next steps we're thinking about, what other things do we have within the coalition that can support them? Really thinking about who else, what other partners who else would they need to talk to, right? Who else do they need to coordinate with? So, our prevention agencies that were at the table, bringing in some of our youth, maybe do some activities outside of school. So they ended up, talking about, the youth keep talking about wanting to do, we live in a community, we're a very small community. We have a lot of churches. We have a lot of kids that don't belong to a church, but go to a youth group because that's where their friends are. And so they're not necessarily, one, it's a safe place for them to go. They feel comfortable going. They're not necessarily members of that church, and their families aren't churchgoers, but they participate because it gives them something to do, and it's a safe place. So if that's the case, then how are we reaching those kids? What's the message that we're giving? So the next step that we really are thinking about is thinking about where kids have contact with people in our communities. And so we took the 12 sectors and we kind of put them in a line, and we said, okay, if we're going to reach kids, if kids are getting a positive message, where's the first place we're going to reach all kids? School, right? So what's the next place where we're going to touch all kids? And so we started thinking about where they hit our 12 sectors, because we felt like kids were getting a message at school, and then there was this huge disconnect from there to law enforcement. Law enforcement seems to be the last stop, right? So what if all 12 of our sectors every time we had connection with our youth, had the same sort of message around, healthy living and choices, offering them support in situations to give them the best chance to make those good decisions. And so from that, just talking about faith came that conversation. And we decided that, okay, so we have almost every kid at some point during the year is at the doctor's office for a physical or for something. What opportunity do we have for that message to get out through there? And we really got all of our 12 sectors together and said, what is the common message that we're giving these kids, and what support and can we offer them every time that there's a connection, even if it's for 10 minutes. So then it gave each one of our sectors kind of an idea of people that they could reach out to when they needed support. So if we had an opportunity for our youth group workers within our faith organizations to know that who was the person that they needed to reach out to if they felt this child was in trouble, right? So who within our organization, within our coalition, can they refer to or pass them off to? It's just a safe handoff.
Well, sort of tying back to my SPIF mindset, I'm hearing still assessment, and then a little bit of sort of capacity assessment and a little bit of capacity building maybe as well. Just for the audience, folks that might not have been through this process before, what's that chunk of time look like? How much time did that take?
That process, and again, this was writing for our year 6 through 10. So we had some relationships already established. We had some of those connections, and we had been looking at our data throughout. So probably about 6 months it took really to dig into that. And then the next step was really thinking about implementation. What are we going to do? So pulling out those 7 prevention strategies and saying, so if our end goal is, XYZ, then what are the steps we need to take to get there? And looking at a 6 through 10 again is different than a 1 through 5. So looking at a 1 through 5, you're going to spend a lot of time writing information. So you need to, a lot of your things are going to be around letting people know who you are, what you do, who's part of your coalition, and then building those skills. So building skills within your coalition members to be able to do prevention, to hold, events where they're passing information, and it's kind of that awareness piece, right? So what are we taking? How are we letting people know that we're here and what we're doing? That's where a lot of those are going to come into. But you want to make sure in your DFC grant that you have something that you're reaching towards, an environmental strategy that you're reaching towards, and you can put those in. I think one of the things that we really kind of decided was we were going to go after this one specific policy. That was kind of our end goal. And then we worked backwards and we said, okay, so what are some barriers that we need to remove in order to get there? Or, what are changing consequences that might, go along with that? So making sure that we were hitting all strategies. We were a young coalition. And so we didn't want to put ourselves in a situation that we couldn't fulfill what we wanted to really do.
Tell me more about the planning process.
So the planning process really was sitting down and saying, okay, so now we have our assessment, we have our piece of data, we kind of know the capacity of which we need to bring this on, who are the players that are going to be in this. What are the collaborative ways that we can work together in order to get to our end goal? And so that was our planning. It was basically that question, taking time to hear from everybody on how they saw that collaboration working, what were people willing to do, what could they bring into that strategy, and then coming up, we have everybody brainstorm some ideas. We pair like ideas together, and then we give it kind of a name, and we say this is about changing a policy. This is about putting in an ordinance. This is about educating our youth. This is about getting our message out. And so we had these 3 or 4 different categories. And then we took those categories and created a specific action plan around each one of those. What are the steps that need to be done in order to reach that? So what do we need to do in the next 12 months to get our message out? What are the things we need to do in the next 12 months to bring in collaboration? What do we need to do in the next 12 months to move this ordinance?
So what are the ways you can collaborate together? What does it look like? And then talking through sort of some timelines.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of brought you right up to, okay, let's implement.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you do that?
Implementation is it can be really tricky, and it can be, but it's the most rewarding part, right? It's what people are there to do. So up until that time, everybody's involved, and so I think one change that was different from our year 1 to year 5 application action plan was that was written for us and given to us. And so we looked at it, and nobody in the coalition, including myself, knew exactly what any of that meant. So we had to interpret what was in there, and just people weren't excited about it. They're, Carrie, you just take care of it for us, and that's kind of how we functioned for the first couple of years. And then we realized it wasn't sustainable, and that we needed people to put in there. What am I willing to do, and what can I really impact from where I sit as a community member? And so when we wrote again, we changed it halfway between in our 1 through 5. So when we were ready to write for 6 through 10, everything came from our coalition members. So it was, those are my ideas. That is how I see this playing out. This is where I'm willing to collaborate. This is where I can make an impact, and this is where I can make a commitment. So when it was done and the action plan was created that way, there was buy-in and enthusiasm from the beginning, because it was their plan and not something that was being done to them.
So at first, you said it so well, people weren't excited about it and it wasn't sustainable. But by changing the process, you were able to build engagement and buy-in, and also build in sustainability through the process.
Right.
Not the funding, not the strategies that you implemented.
Right.
I like it. I always say the power is in the process. Awesome. All right. So then you've implemented your strategies. You're working together with the coalition. Everybody's excited. I kind of hinted at sustainability. Can you tell me, what did that look like for your DFC coalition?
There were a lot of things that were built in for sustainability for our 6 through 10 versus our 1 through 5. I think in year 3, you need to create a sustainability plan. And I called Angie and said, "What is this?" And she was like, I don't know. I'm talking to our, conduct officer about it. So I called him, and then he said, "Well, give me exactly what Angie gave me." And I said, "Okay, well, where's the form?" And he's like, "Well, there's no form. You need to come up with a sustainability plan." And I was just lost. I was like, I don't even know what that even means. And so we used the process of the state coalition to really go through sustainability and who was responsible for what. And we did kind of the same process. And so as you go through this process, and you have buy-in along the way, and you take the work from the coalition director and coordinator and empower your coalition members to do that, and to build capacity around what they're working on, and to bring in other partners to move things forward, you naturally are creating sustainability, because it's you're looking at environmental strategies, you're looking at involving sectors who then implement within their own organizations the same mission that you have. And so when you're aligning your whys and you're going in the same direction, everybody's working towards the same goal, sustainability will happen, rather than it being myself doing all the work and making some sort of booklet that I hand over at the end of my time and say, continue my work. So the whole idea, I think sustainability at first, for our first 5 years, was scary. The second 5 years, it's just part of what we're doing.
So you're building the foundation for sustainability through the entire process, not just, okay, we're at the end, let's write this thing called a sustainability action plan. Where's a form for that? So you've got that buy-in built and capacity built. When it comes to, okay, what do we sustain? How do you figure that out? How do you know what's working, what's not working?
So we had a really great evaluator who really kind of recorded. I think having a system in which you're recording everything is important, whether you have an evaluator who has a recording system or you develop it on your own. I think my coalition coordinator did a great job. My coworker did a great job of capturing all of that. I knew pretty early on that details and data was not my wheelhouse. And so she was the perfect fit for us and for our coalition. And she did a great job of recording everything. And too much data, too much evaluation is always better than trying to figure it out at the end. So we could kind of weed through and say this wasn't important, but to understand how many people that you impacted, giving different, surveys when we were doing, a classroom presentation or holding an event or, talking with parents or working in our youth coalitions, gathering data from them all of the time, and watching things move and watching people, their attitudes change, watching, 30-day use go down, all of those things. I think really paying attention to who you're talking to and how often you're talking to them.
So sustainability doesn't just start at the end, it's woven throughout. And then I also heard you say evaluation, you evaluate the entire time, not just at the end.
Every day is evaluated.
Yep.
Every day is recorded.
It doesn't happen unless you measure it.
That's
Yeah.
right. I mean, it's tough to sit and go back and say, oh, remember when we had that event like 8 months ago? Who was there? Remember having a conversation with, so-and-so. We really captured everything as we went.
Mm-hmm. So we've moved through basically the steps of the SPIF just through this conversation, talking about the DFC process. How does your evaluation bring things full circle for future funding if you find another funding source that meets your coalition's mission, not to change your mission for that funding?
I mean, I look at it definitely as just as a roadmap, that it's guiding you and saying to you where you were, where you are, and where you're going, and if you're making progress and who's at the table. Who. I think root causes. Also, really digging down into what's really behind what's going on in our community. Sometimes we address some surface level things, and we're just constantly chasing that. But not really digging down deep into what's really going on, and being vulnerable and okay to look at what that is and saying, what, this isn't the way we're addressing things, really isn't changing what's underlying and what we really need to deal with. So evaluation for me is not my wheelhouse. I have to have somebody who I trust who's really looking at that, and then can help step in when our coalition needs that guidance.
It sounds like between years 1 through 5 and then 6 through 10, not only did you evaluate sort of your outcomes, the data, but you kind of evaluated the process as well and then made some changes there. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Am I seeing that or hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the process, I definitely, and it was kind of a mistake. To be honest, it wasn't something we were really paying attention to. But when we switched the way that we were thinking about how the coalition functioned, when we thought about that it wasn't my job to move the work, but my role really was to be the cheerleader of the coalition, and to be the person behind the scenes, and empowering them and coaching them to getting where they wanted to go. And sometimes that's hard because it shifts, it's a power shift. And so decisions that were being made, directions that were being taken weren't necessarily places that I thought were important for us to go, but it's where the energy was, and it was where people were empowered to go. And it were amazing things, and they were things I never thought of. And so it made more of an impact on our community by having it being coalition led rather than it being instructed from a director. And so that was evaluating that just kind of happened. You could see it, you could physically see it in the faces and the excitement and the attendance of our coalition. When that happens, people are coming back and they're being engaged and they're having conversations with people in the community outside of the coalition meeting. When we had three task force, one for prescription drug, one for alcohol, and one for marijuana at the end of our 5-year, at the end of our 4-year. And then we actually had our hospital step up and say, you know what, this prescription drug task force is our responsibility. We need to be doing this, and we need to own this. And so they started one, and we said, that's awesome. That's exactly what you should be doing. And that's the power of community collaboration. And so it allowed us then to really work between alcohol and marijuana. Then when I left the coalition, there was about 6 months where they didn't have another director, and so or another staff member. And because we had empowered our coalition to lead, we had coalition members step up and to lead those task forces. And so it freed up the new director at that point to do the work that she needed to do on the back end. And so she didn't have to worry necessarily about making sure the task force work was being done because it was being led by coalition members. So.
An empowered and engaged coalition and community that are taking ownership over the substance misuse in their community. Yep. Sounds wonderful. I love it. Well, this has been very, very informative. Really excited to get this out there and see what our listeners think about it and get some of their feedback. And for those folks that might still be relatively new to the SPIF or Strategic Prevention Framework, on our PTTC website, we have the virtual Strategic Prevention Framework Academy this year. All of those resources are available and broken down, organized by each step of the SPIF. They're there ready for you, and I'll put the link for that in the show notes. Thank you again for a wonderful podcast episode.
Thank
you.
All
right. Until next time.
That concludes this episode. Thank you all for not only taking time to listen, but for your continued work making our community safe, healthy, and drug-free. If you'd like to know what trainings we have coming up, check out our website at pttcnetwork.org. There you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter and get the latest, greatest delivered right to your inbox each month. And remember, prevention is better together. And together, we are stronger. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.